as the ancient Greek and ancient Roman philosophers put it, the soul is that which moves a living being. So the soul is in plants, animals, and especially human beings, for all of these three beings are moving and living. It would be hard to imagine a living being without a soul because that would be a self-contradiction. It's hard to imagine a round square because there is no such thing as a round square. And it's hard also to imagine a dead soul because the soul is life itself. So this was the general view held by ancient philosophers, both Roman and Greek. The Greek word for soul is psychos, which comes from psyche or from the mind. And the Latin word for soul was anima, which comes from animate, or beings which are animated, and all beings which are animated possess therefore the anima. Now I'm moving on to some of the general views held by the soul held on the soul by a few ancient philosophers. I'm going to go through Socrates in one of the Platonic dialogues, and then move on to Seneca, Aristotle, and finally conclude with the Thomistic view defended by St. Thomas Aquinas, another Thomistic theologian, and furthermore, the principle of sufficient reason, sort of synthesized with the existence of God and why the human soul strives for nothing but God himself. So here we go. And what do we call the principle which does not admit of death? The immortal, he said. And does the soul admit of death? No. Then the soul is immortal. Yes, he said. And may we say that this is proven? Yes, abundantly, Socrates. Abundantly proven, Socrates, he replied. And supposing that the odd were imperishable, must not three be imperishable? Of course. And if that which is cold were imperishable, when the warm principle came attacking the snow, must not the snow have retired whole and unmelted? For it could have never perished, nor could it have remained, and admitted the heat. True, he said. This is the principle of contraries which Plato proposes in his Phaedo, or Socrates, where things originate by their contraries. Heat originates by cold, cold originates by heat, life originates by death, and death by life. This is the analogy that he tries to give. And, you know, when both meet each other, one annihilates the other. And the same may be said of the immortal. If the immortal is also imperishable, then the soul will be imperishable as well as immortal. But if not, some other proof of her imperishableness will have to be given. No other proof is needed, he said. For if the immortal being eternal is liable to perish, then nothing is imperishable. Yes, replied Socrates, all men will agree that God, and the essential form of life, and the immortal in general, will never perish. Yes, all men, he said. That is true. And what is more, gods, if I am not mistaken, as well as men. Seeing, then, that the immortal is indestructible, must not the soul, if she is immortal, be imperishable? Most certainly. Then when death attacks a man, the mortal portion of him may be supposed to die, but the immortal goes out of way of death and is preserved safe and sound? True. Then, Cebes, beyond question, the soul is immortal and imperishable, and our souls will truly exist in another world. Now the Platonic and Socratic view was that the soul of every living being proceeded into the afterlife, or proceeded into beyond the physical life. He doesn't hint any division between the souls of vegetables, animals, and human beings. To him, because the soul is the source of life, it cannot be destroyed. It can only simply be detached from the body, by which the body itself is annihilated. Now I'm moving on to a section of Aristotle's De Anima, or his treatise on the soul. And It might not seem contrary to what Plato said and Socrates said previously, but it gives a different insight onto what the soul is. The soul is the cause or source of the living body. The terms cause and source have many senses, but the soul is the cause of its body alike in all three senses which we explicitly recognize. It is the source or origin of movement. It is the end. It is the essence of the whole living body. That it is the last is clear, for in every thing the essence is identical with the ground of its being, and here, in the case of living things, their beings is to live, and of their being and their living soul, the soul in them, is the cause or source. Further, the actuality of whatever is potential is identical with its formulable essence. We must maintain further that the soul is also the cause of the living body, as the original source of local movement. The power of locomotion is not, however, found in all living things, but change of quality and change of quantity are also due to the soul. Sensation is held to be a qualitative alteration, and nothing except that which has the soul in it is capable of sensation. The same holds of quantitative changes, which constitute growth and decay. Nothing grows or decays naturally except what feeds itself, and nothing feeds itself except which has a share of soul in it. So those are the two ancient Greek, the two main ancient Greek theories on the soul. And I'm going to give one Roman philosopher, Seneca, who was a Roman diplomat of later time, and he has a slightly different view on the soul. He believes that the soul is a corporeal being, and here it is. This is from his letters to Lucilius, and he says, "The goods of the body are bodily, so therefore must be the goods of the soul, for the soul too is corporeal. Ergo, man's good must be corporeal, since man himself is corporeal. I am sadly astray if the elements which support man and preserve or restore his health are not bodily. Therefore his good is a body. You will have no doubt, I am sure, that emotions are bodily things. If I may be allowed to wedge in another subject not under immediate discussion, like wrath, love, sternness, unless you doubt whether they change our features, knot our foreheads, relax the countenance, spread blushes, or drive away the blood, what then? Do you think that such evident remarks of the body are stamped upon us by anything else than body? And if emotions are corporeal, so are diseases of the spirit, such as greed, cruelty, and all the faults which harden in our souls, to such an extent that they get into an incurable state." Now, this is quite contrasting to what Plato and Aristotle held, which I didn't mention from any text, but they held that the soul was in every part of the living being. So, for example, the soul was present in the fingers, in the brain, in the heart, in all of the parts of your body which were living and in motion. They would be in motion and living because of the soul itself. And according to Seneca, the soul is just the corporeal thing. I also forgot to mention that there were ancient philosophers who did hold that the soul was a mortal thing, that it did not preserve or that it was corrupted through death. They held that the soul would not depart from the body after the body died, and such people like Epicurus held that the soul was one of the things which died alongside the body. But now moving on to the Thomistic doctrine held by St. Thomas Aquinas, which is similar in some remarks to that of Aristotle, but he gives an even further insight into what the soul is, and this is found in his major treatise called the Summa Contra Gentiles. He offers first off a refutation of the view held by those like Seneca who argued that the soul was a body, and here it is. There were also others whose thinking was even wider of the mark, since they asserted that the soul is a body. Although they held divergent and various opinions, it suffices to refute them here collectively. For since living things are physical realities, they are composed of matter and form. They are composed of a body and a soul, which makes them actually living. Therefore, one of these two must be the form, and the other matter. But the body cannot be the form, because the body is not present in another thing as its matter and subject. The soul then is the form, and consequently is not a body, since no body is a form. It is moreover impossible for two bodies to coincide, but so long as the body lives, the soul is not apart from it. Therefore the soul is not a body. Furthermore, his treatise on intellectual substances and showing why they are immaterial. It clearly follows that intellectual substances are immaterial, for everything composed of matter and form is a body, since matter cannot receive diverse forms except with respect to its various parts, and this diversity of parts can exist in matter only so far as one common matter is divided into several by dimensions of existing in matter, for without quantity substance is indivisible. But it has been shown that no intelligent substance is a body. It remains, therefore, that such a substance is not composed of matter and form. Furthermore, just as man does not exist apart from this man, so matter does not exist apart from this matter. Any subsistent thing that is composed of matter and form is then composed of individual form and individual matter. But the intellect cannot be composed of individual matter and form, because the species of things understood are made actually intelligible by being abstracted from individual matter, and as a result of being actually intelligible, they become one with the intellect. That is why the intellect also must be without individual matter. Therefore, a substance endowed with intelligence is not composed of matter and form. Now, from what has just been said, it is clearly shown that every intellectual substance is incorruptible, for all corruption occurs through the separation of form from matter, absolute corruption through the separation of the substantial form, relative corruption through the separation of an accidental form. For so long as the form remains, the thing must exist, since by the form the substance is made the proper recipient of the act of being. Now, where there is no composition of matter and form, there can be no separation of them neither, then, can there be corruption. It has been shown, however, that no intellectual substance is composed of matter and form. Therefore, no intellectual substance is corruptible. Moreover, that which belongs to a thing through itself is necessarily in it always and inseparably. Thus, roundness is in a circle through itself, but is by accident in a coin, so that the existence of a non-round coin is possible, whereas it is impossible for a circle not to be round. Now, being is consequent upon form through itself, for by through itself we mean according as that thing is such. And each and every thing has being according as it has form. Therefore substances which are not themselves forms can be deprived of being, for so far as they lose form, even as a coin is deprived of roundness as a result of ceasing to be circular. But substances which are themselves forms can never be deprived of being. Thus, if a substance were circle, it could never be non-round. Now we have already shown that intellectual substances are themselves subsisting forms. Hence, they cannot possibly cease to be, and therefore they are incorruptible. Moreover, if an intelligent substance is a body, it is either finite or infinite. Now, it is impossible for a body to be actually infinite, as proved in Aristotle's physics. Therefore, if we suppose that such a substance is a body at all, it is a finite one. But this is also impossible, since, as was shown in Book 1 of this work, infinite power can exist in no finite body. And yet the cognitive power of the intellect is in a certain way infinite, for by adding number to its knowledge of the species of numbers is infinitely extended. And the same applies to its knowledge of the species of figures and proportions. Moreover, the intellect grasps the universal, which is virtually infinite in its scope, because it contains individuals which are potentially infinite. Therefore, the intellect is not a body. Now, I didn't mention, but Socrates and Plato in the Phaedo do argue that the union between the soul and the body is merely an accidental thing, and St. Thomas seems to try to refute this because he argues that, well, the soul is the form of the body, and everybody naturally seeks the soul as the soul naturally seeks a body, its individual body. And so here he says, furthermore, to be moved and not to be moved, to move and not to move, lie within the power of every self-mover. But the soul, according to the Platonic opinion, moves the body in the capacity of self-mover. It is therefore the soul's power to move the body and not to move it. Accordingly, if the soul is united with to the body merely as the mover to movable, it will be in the soul's power to be separated from the body at will and to be united to it at will. And this is clearly false. Now that the soul is united to the body as its proper form is proved as follows: that by which something becomes a being in act from a being in potency is its form and act. But it is through the soul that the body becomes a being in act from being potentially existent, for living is the being of the living thing. Now the seed before animation is living only in potency, and through the soul becomes living in act. Therefore the soul is the form of the animated body. Now St. Thomas goes about talking of the corruption of the soul. He's only talking about the natural corruption of the soul, which does not take place. I won't get into his part on the supernatural corruption of the soul, which comes about through sin. But what he has to say on the natural corruption of the soul is as follows. From what has been said, therefore, it can clearly be shown that the human soul is not corrupted when the body is corrupted. For it was proved above that every intellectual substance is incorruptible, but man's soul is an intellectual substance, as was shown. It therefore follows that the human soul is incorruptible. Again, no thing is corrupted with respect to that wherein its perfection consists, for mutations in regard to perfection and corruption are contrary to one another. The perfection of the human soul, however, consists in a certain abstraction from the body, for the soul is perfected by knowledge and virtue, and it is perfected in knowledge the more it considers immaterial things, the perfection of virtue consisting in man's not submitting to the passions of the body, but moderating and controlling them in accordance with reason. Consequently, the soul is not corrupted by being separated from the body. Now it may be said that the soul's perfection lies in its operational separation from the body, and its corruption in its existential separation therefrom. Such an argument misses the mark, for a thing's operation manifests its substance and its being, since a thing operates according as it is a being, and its proper operation follows upon its proper nature. The operation of a thing, therefore, can be perfected only so far as its substance is perfected. Thus, if the soul, in leaving the body, is perfected operationally, its incorporeal substance will not fail in its being through separation from the body. And furthermore, the Thomistic theologian and philosopher of the 20th century, Garrigou-Lagrange, has this to say of the soul. The soul of man is not simple or unextended, as is the soul of plant and animal, but it is also spiritual, that is intrinsically independent of matter and therefore subsistent, so that it continues to exist after its separation from the body. These statements are proved by the soul's intellective activity, because activity follows being, and the mode of activity reveals the mode of being. How do we show that the intellective activity is independent of matter? By the universality of the object, which the intellect abstracts from the particular and limited sense world. Among the truths thus discovered are universal and necessary principles, independent of all particular facts, independent of all space and time. So this is Garrigou-Lagrange's final synthesis of the Thomistic argument that the soul is immortal, because it conceives and grasps of things which are universal and independent of that particular entity. We can conceive of squares, shapes, and things. We can conceive of a thousand-sided shape without it actually existing, because these things are outside of space and time. Now, to finish off with Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason, that a thing has a reason for its own existence, either by itself or from an exterior cause. Um, it must be remembered that the soul is, at least in the context of the human being, when we seek things like happiness, we are seeking it in limited goods in this world, in finite things. But as happiness is an unlimited thing and outside of space and time, the sufficient reason for why the soul seeks happiness is only found in God, and the existence of God is, above all, what will lead the human soul and the intellect to happiness. So that's all for now, and God bless. Thank you.